Rancher lived alone for years, until the Bigfoot led him to an ancient cave painting. For years, the old rancher lived alone among the snow and silence. One morning, he found footprints too large for any man, too straight for any bear. He followed them through the frozen pines until a shadow moved. What he saw wasn't a monster. It was something older. The creature led him to a cave hidden in the cliffs where firelight revealed ancient drawings, humans and giants hunting side by side. His voice trembled as he whispered, "Maybe we were never alone." Out there beneath the cold wind of the frontier, the past was still breathing. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone anymore. Before we begin, take a moment to comment your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now, settle into a quiet place, breathe deep, and let the whispers of the Wild West carry you into tonight's tale. Snow fell heavy that morning, swallowing the world in white. The wind came down the mountain in long, lonely sighs, curling around the wooden fence posts of Ethan Cole's ranch. For years, that sound had been his only company, the wind, the creak of timber, and the faint hiss of a fire that never spoke back. Inside the small log cabin, Ethan poured black coffee into a tin cup. His hands were scarred, strong, and slow. On the mantel above the fire, 2 small wooden toys sat gathering dust, a reminder of the family he'd buried 5 winters ago. The days since then had folded into each other like pages of a forgotten book. Every sunrise brought the same silence. Every sunset carried the same ache. But that morning was different. As Ethan stepped out onto the porch, the snow was knee-deep. The air bit at his cheeks, sharp as cut glass. He was about to saddle his mare when something stopped him, a pattern in the snow beyond the fence. He squinted through the flurries. Footprints. Not the kind a man would leave. Each one was nearly twice the size of his boot, pressed deep and straight as if whatever made them carried the weight of a world. Ethan's brow furrowed. Bears didn't walk upright that long, and no man could have come this way through last night's storm. Curiosity flared against the dull numbness in his chest. He grabbed his lantern, pulled on his gloves, and stepped into the white. The valley stretched before him, vast, silent, ancient. His horse's hooves thudded softly against the snow, each step sinking into the trail of those impossible prints. The lantern's flame swayed in the wind, casting long, golden arcs across the pale trees. Time seemed to slow as he rode deeper into the forest. The sound of hooves echoed through the pines like a heartbeat, then a flicker movement in the fog, a shadow, something tall, too tall. It crossed between the trees in a single stride. The horse reared, snorting wild-eyed. Ethan was thrown into the snow, his lantern tumbling, the light sputtering out. The world went white, a blizzard of sound and silence. He gasped, rolling to his knees, one hand gripping the frozen ground. And there, through the veil of falling snow, it stood, a towering shape half hidden by the storm-broad shoulders, fur matted with frost and eyes that gleamed like amber coals. Those eyes met his, and for a heartbeat the world stopped moving. It wasn't rage he saw there, not hunger, not threat, but something older recognition, sorrow, a strange quiet knowing. For a man who'd spent half a decade in silence, it felt like the mountain itself was finally looking back at him. Then the sky cracked open. Thunder rolled down the peaks, shattering the stillness. The creature turned, disappearing into the white, its footsteps fading like the echo of a dream. Ethan rose slowly, breath shaking. He saw it then, pressed against the black rock near the ridge, a handprint. Massive. 5 fingers spread, wide, dried blood staining the stone. The storm howled again, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt his heart racing alive, terrified awake. He reached out, gloved fingers tracing the shape of that impossible mark. Snow melted against his hand, and the whisper of wind carried his voice into the mountains. Maybe I've been alone too long. Part 1. Tracks in the snow. The storm had passed, but it left behind a silence so heavy that even the crows refused to break it. Gray clouds hung low over the valley like tired eyelids, and the wind carried the faint creak of old wood, the voice of fences too long forgotten. Ethan Cole stood by that same fence, now one gloved hand tracing the frozen rail. He could still see the massive footprints from the night before, though the new snow had softened their edges. Each print was half filled with ice, but their shape was still clear, 5 long toes, deep human-like, too symmetrical for any bear. He knelt beside one. The air smelled of pine and smoke and something faintly wild. For a long while he didn't move. The world had felt empty for years, and now all at once it was too alive. He rose, tightened the strap of his coat, and followed the prints toward the ridge. The climb was slow. The snow came to his knees, and the trees grew denser with each step. Frost clung to his beard, and his breath smoked in the pale light. Somewhere up ahead, a raven called, once sharp distant, then vanished into the fog. Ethan had been on this mountain 1,000 times before, and yet as he walked, the terrain began to feel unfamiliar. The path twisted, leading him to a narrow clearing bordered by tall stone spires. There at the center he saw something that didn't belong. A tent, canvas pale against the snow with a small fire crackling beside it. Beside the flame stood a young woman, her dark hair tucked under a wool hat, her face lit by the soft glow of the fire. She was sketching something on a piece of parchment, her gloved hands quick and careful. Ethan hesitated, then stepped closer. The snow crunched beneath his boots. She looked up, startled, but her eyes, green-gray like the storm sky, quickly steadied. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," she said, voice steady but curious. Her accent was soft Eastern, not the drawl of frontier folk. Ethan tipped his hat slightly. "Didn't expect to find anyone to see." She smiled faintly and straightened. "I'm Lila Thompson, Archaeological Society of Boston. At least I was before they decided this was nonsense." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Nonsense." She lifted one of her sketches, a piece of parchment showing a series of cave drawings, tall figures with wide shoulders, their hands the size of shovels. They called it myth, said the stories were exaggerations. She shrugged her eyes, never leaving his. "But I've seen these markings in 3 different states, always the same handprint, the same pattern." Ethan looked at the drawing, the same 5-fingered mark he'd seen burned into the rock last night. For a moment, his heart kicked against his ribs. "What are you looking for?" he asked quietly. "Proof," she said. "Proof that the legends of the Sasquatch tribes were more than fireside stories. That maybe," her gaze softened, "maybe the old world still remembers what we've forgotten." Ethan looked away. "Stories don't bring anyone back." The words came out harsher than he intended. Lila's expression shifted, not offended, but curious. She studied his face, the deep lines, the distant eyes. "You've lost something?" she said softly. He didn't answer. After a pause, she crouched by the fire, flipping open a worn notebook filled with notes, maps, and sketches. "The people who first told these stories said the creature wasn't a monster," she said. "They called it the Watcher of the Mountains. It guarded sacred places and appeared only to those who'd known true solitude." Her eyes lifted, meeting his again. "If you stop believing in stories, you stop being human." The words hit him like a gust of wind. For the first time in years, something stirred inside Ethan's chest, a small, fragile warmth breaking through the frost. He thought of the eyes he'd seen through the storm, not the eyes of a beast, but of something that understood loneliness. He opened his mouth to speak, but the sound that came from the forest froze them both. It was low at first, almost a vibration beneath the snow. Then it grew a deep, echoing roar that rolled through the trees like thunder. The horses, tied near the tent, reared eyes wide, snorting clouds of panic. Ethan turned sharply toward the sound hand, instinctively on his rifle. Lila stood still, her breath shallow, her face pale. What was that? Ethan's eyes swept the tree line. "Not a bear," he said quietly. "Not anything I've ever heard." The forest fell silent again. Even the wind held its breath. Then, through the wall of pines, a shadow moved. It wasn't fast, just a single stride between trunks, but it was massive. The shape of a man, only twice the size fur glinting under the weak daylight. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. He grabbed Lila's arm and pulled her down behind a boulder. "Stay quiet," he whispered. The air felt heavy, charged, as if the world itself were waiting for something to happen. Snow fell in slow motion, each flake catching the faint shimmer of light filtering through the branches. Lila's breathing came fast, her eyes wide. Ethan's hand tightened around the cold metal of his rifle, but he didn't lift it. The shadow moved again. Closer this time. He could see the curve of its shoulder, the steam of its breath rising like smoke. For a moment the creature stopped, and Ethan knew it was looking right at them. Two amber eyes glowed faintly through the storm, not wild, not cruel, but aware. Then just as suddenly it turned away, vanishing into the labyrinth of white trees. Silence returned. Only the wind moved, carrying the faint echo of that impossible roar down the mountain. Ethan stayed still for a long time. The snow melted slowly against his gloves, dripping into the cracks of his hands. Lila finally spoke, her voice trembling but calm. "You saw it too." Ethan nodded once. He didn't trust himself to speak. His breath clouded the air like smoke, his heart pounding in rhythm with the wind's whisper. When they finally stood, the forest looked the same, quiet, lifeless, peaceful, as if nothing had happened at all. But the prints in the snow told another story. Lila crouched, measuring the distance between steps with her gloved hand. "They're spaced almost 8 feet apart," she murmured. "Do you understand what that means?" Ethan stared down the trail, disappearing into the fog. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It means whatever's out there doesn't want to hide anymore." The fire crackled as they returned to camp. Neither spoke for a long while. Lila poured water from a kettle, her hands still shaking slightly. Ethan stared into the flames, his thoughts circling like vultures above a wound. He'd lived half his life believing the world had nothing left to show him, no surprises, no miracles, no reason to hope. But now, the mountain had whispered back. He reached for the notebook beside her pack, turning to a page filled with ancient symbols. One of them, a sun surrounded by 5 marks, matched the charm he'd seen in his dream. Lila noticed eyes softening. "You've seen it before, haven't you?" Ethan didn't answer. He only looked toward the ridge where snow still drifted between the dark pines. Out there, somewhere in that vast, untamed silence, something had watched him and chosen to let him live. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not fear, not loneliness. Something smaller but stronger. Wonder Part 2. The creature and the storm. By the time the sun slid behind the mountains, the wind had started to turn again. It came from the north this time, colder, sharper, the kind that cuts through wool and skin and bone. The sky carried the smell of snow. Even the trees seemed to brace themselves. Ethan stood by the fire outside Lila's tent, watching the smoke twist upward and vanish. He'd helped her tie down the ropes before the storm came back, though she insisted she'd weathered worse in Montana digs. He didn't argue, but the look in his eyes said different. "You should stay near the cabin," he told her. "There's a ridge west of here. The snow breaks there safer ground." Lila looked up from her notes, the glow of the fire catching her face. "You think I came all this way to hide from a storm?" she said, half smiling. Then softer. "Besides, I'm closer to what I'm looking for up here." Ethan frowned. "And what's that?" Her eyes drifted toward the dark line of the forest. The truth. He didn't press further. There was something in her voice, the same ache that had haunted his own for years. Maybe she was chasing ghosts too. As night settled, the world turned gray-blue. Snow began to fall again, light at first, then heavier. Thick flakes swirling in spirals. Ethan tied his horse near a pine and packed his rifle. "Storm will be rough," he said. "If it gets worse, follow the trail down to my place." Lila nodded, but her gaze lingered on the mountains. "I'll be fine," she said. Then she hesitated. "Ethan, you believe me now, don't you? About what we saw?" He paused, jaw tightening. "I believe something's out there," he said finally. "Whether it's a story or not, I don't know yet." The wind picked up, tearing through the valley. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled a sound too low, too deep to be just weather. The storm came fast. Within minutes, the sky turned to iron. Snow slammed sideways, stealing sight and breath. Ethan shouted over the wind, but his voice vanished in the howl. Lila. No answer. He turned toward the tent. It was already half buried, the ropes snapping under the weight of snow. He fought toward it, boots sinking knee-deep, until he reached the clearing empty. Only a torn flap flapped wildly in the gale. Lila. The echo vanished into white. Then a sound, faint but sharp. A cry. Up the ridge. He ran. The climb was brutal. The wind clawed at his coat snow, stinging his eyes. Each step felt heavier than the last. He slipped once, caught himself on a root, and pushed onward. The cry came again, closer this time. When he reached the ridge, he saw her, Lila, half collapsed against a rock, her lantern flickering weakly beside her. She was clutching her leg face, pale hair plastered with ice. Sprained ankle, she gasped. Ground gave out. Ethan crouched beside her, checking the joint quickly. "We can't stay here," he said. "Storm will bury us in minutes." She nodded weakly. "Then where?" A flash of lightning split the clouds, and in that moment of white fire, Ethan saw it. A dark figure standing at the mouth of a ravine across the ridge. Tall, broad, still as stone. Then it moved. The shape stepped back, vanishing into shadow. Ethan's chest tightened. There, he whispered. What Lila turned, but the light had gone. He didn't answer. He slid his arm beneath her shoulders. "Come on. We're getting out of this." They stumbled through the storm, following the faint line of the ridge. Ethan's lantern swung wildly, throwing brief flashes of gold against the white chaos. Every now and then he caught glimpses of movement, a dark shape far ahead, like a guide appearing only when he was about to lose his way. At first he thought it was a trick of the storm. Then he noticed something impossible. Where the figure stepped, the snow beneath it didn't break. It settled. Like the mountain itself was making room. By the time they reached shelter, Ethan's arms burned with exhaustion. He half-carried, half-dragged Lila beneath an overhang of stone, a shallow cave tucked into the cliffside. Inside it was warmer, the air still. He set her down, started a small fire with the lantern's flame, and stripped off his soaked gloves. The light flickered against the walls and revealed something that froze him again. Handprints. Dozens of them. Faded old, smeared into the rock, some large as barrels, others smaller, human-sized, overlapping in spirals and circles. Lila's breath caught. "Oh my God!" Ethan ran his fingers across one of the marks. The paint or blood was ancient, dry, but somehow untouched by snow or time. "This isn't from now," she whispered. "This is thousands of years old." He turned to her. "What does it mean?" Her eyes glowed with awe. "It means someone wanted to be remembered. Or maybe they didn't want to be forgotten." The fire crackled softly, and for the first time that night the wind outside began to fade. Ethan leaned back against the wall, exhaustion setting in. He could feel the mountain breathing a slow, ancient rhythm pulsing beneath the stone. Then he heard it. A sound from the mouth of the cave, heavy, steady footsteps in the snow. Lila froze. Her eyes darted to Ethan, who slowly reached for his rifle. The firelight trembled, and a shadow passed across the opening. It stopped. For a long moment the only sound was the wind sighing past the rocks, then a deep exhale like a giant breathing. Ethan's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could move, the creature stepped into view. It filled the entrance. Nearly 8 feet tall, its shoulders brushed the stone. Snow clung to its fur, melting into rivulets down its arms, and those eyes, amber and sad, fixed on Ethan, then drifted to Lila. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stared as if part of her had been waiting for this all along. The creature's chest rose and fell slowly. Then it reached one massive hand toward the fire. Ethan tensed, but instead of striking it, extended something in its palm. A small circular object, a stone amulet etched with the same sun symbol from Lila's sketches. Ethan stared, unable to speak. The creature set the amulet gently on the ground, then stepped back into the storm, disappearing as silently as it had come. For a long time neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hiss of melting snow dripping from the ceiling. Lila finally reached for the amulet. It was warm. She turned it in her hands, eyes glistening. "He's not hunting us," she whispered. "He's protecting something." Ethan looked toward the darkness beyond the cave. Protecting something. Or guarding it. Either way, he knew one thing for certain: the creature had saved them from the storm. By dawn, the snow had stopped. Light crept into the cave, gold and soft. Lila slept beside the dying fire, her face calm, the amulet still clutched in her hand. Ethan stood at the entrance, staring out over the valley. The storm had wiped away all tracks, theirs and the creature's. It was as if the mountain had decided to keep its secret. He closed his eyes, feeling the cold air brush against his skin. Somewhere in the distance, a low hum rolled across the peaks, not thunder, not wind. A heartbeat. He looked down at the handprints on the stone, then at the faint trail of snow melting beneath his boots. Whatever this was, myth or miracle, he could feel it now pulsing through the ground, through the air, through him. The mountain was alive. And for the first time since his family's death, Ethan Cole didn't feel like the last man left in the world. Part 3. The Cave of Memory. When the mountain woke, it did so quietly. The wind gentled the trees, held their breath, and sunlight filtered down through the storm's leftovers like honey through glass. Ethan stood at the cave mouth, watching the first golden rays crawl across the snow. Behind him, the fire was almost dead. Only a few coals glowed, casting orange halos over the rock wall. Lila stirred under her blanket. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then her eyes caught the shape of the handprints, ancient, layered, fading into each other like generations, whispering through time. And she remembered. The creature. The storm. The amulet still warm in her hand. She sat up, turning it toward the light. The sun symbol carved in its center gleamed faintly, each groove filled with something that shimmered like gold dust. Ethan turned his shadow, cutting across the stone. "You sleep any a little?" she said. "Did you?" He gave a quiet snort. Wasn't planning to. He crouched beside her, eyes narrowing at the amulet. "Why'd he give that to you?" Lila looked up at him. "Maybe it wasn't to me." She held the stone out. "It could have been meant for you." Ethan didn't take it. Instead, he stared at the cave wall, at the sea of handprints that surrounded them. There were so many, big and small men and beasts painted in ochre and ash. Some formed circles. Some reached toward the ceiling as if trying to touch the sky. "What do you think it means?" he asked quietly. Lila's voice softened. "It's not a warning, Ethan. It's a memory." They spent the morning exploring deeper into the cave. The air grew colder, but the walls came alive with drawings, lines of red and black pigment that told stories older than language. A line of hunters carrying spears. Beside them, larger figures, broad, wild, protective. In one panel, a man and a giant stood side by side, facing the same enemy, a wall of flame or storm painted in streaks of white. Lila traced her gloved fingers over the markings. "Do you see it?" she murmured. They weren't enemies. They lived together. Ethan watched in silence. The light from their lanterns flickered across the walls, casting shadows that made the figures seem to move as if the past itself was breathing. He cleared his throat. "Maybe that's what the amulet's for." Lila turned. "A peace symbol. Or a reminder," he said. That once, the wild and the human weren't so different. They emerged from the tunnel hours later, blinking into the afternoon light. The sky was clearing a rare, soft blue. Below them stretched the valley, endless, white, pure. The world looked untouched again, as if no storm had ever come. Lila sat on a rock, catching her breath. Her hair glinted like dark copper in the sun. "You ever wonder," she said, "why some people spend their lives chasing things they can't prove?" Ethan leaned against a pine. "I used to think it was foolish." And now he looked toward the ridge. "Now I think maybe those are the only things worth chasing." Lila smiled faintly. "I'll take that as progress." They followed a set of prints leading away from the cave, massive steps pressed deep into the snow, curving toward a frozen stream below. Each footprint felt like a breadcrumb trail left by something ancient. Ethan moved quietly, scanning the tree line, his instincts caught between hunter and pilgrim. Lila knelt by the stream. The water ran dark and cold beneath the ice, and beside it lay another mark. Not a footprint this time, but a carved symbol in the bark of a pine, the same sun surrounded by 5 strokes. She whispered, "He's leading us somewhere." Ethan frowned, or warning us not to follow. Before she could reply, the sound of hooves echoed across the valley. They both turned sharply. Down the slope, several riders were moving fast, dark coats, rifles glinting in the light. The lead horse carried Sheriff Amos Reed. The sheriff reined up when he saw them. "Cole," he called. "Didn't expect to find you this far up." His voice was clipped, wary. Ethan straightened. "You're a long way from town, Sheriff. Got reports from a trapper. Said he heard something big tearing through the woods last night. Figured I'd come see for myself." Lila stepped forward. "Sheriff, there's no threat here. What you heard, it's not a monster." Reed's eyes narrowed. "Miss, I don't recall asking for your opinion." He turned back to Ethan. "You've seen something, haven't you? I can read it all over your face." Ethan said nothing. The sheriff spat into the snow. "Well, if there's something out there, I'll find it. Town's already nervous. Last thing we need's another story scaring the women folk." He turned his horse. "Stay out of my way, Cole. And for God's sake, don't go playing hero again." The men rode off, leaving churned snow in their wake. Lila exhaled, shoulders tight. "He's going to hunt it." Ethan's eyes darkened. "He'll die trying." That night they stayed at Ethan's cabin. The storm hadn't returned, but the air still felt heavy charged, as if the mountain was holding its breath again. Lila sat near the fire, writing in her notebook. Ethan sharpened his knife absently, watching the flames dance across her face. Finally, he broke the silence. "You really believe it? That thing means no harm?" She looked up. "I believe it's not what we think it is." He frowned. "You're not scared." "I was," she said softly. "But fear and wonder aren't that different. Sometimes they're just 2 sides of the same coin." Ethan smiled faintly. "You sound like my wife." The room went quiet. The only sound was the fire cracking and the soft sigh of the wind pressing against the cabin walls. "I'm sorry," Lila whispered. He nodded. "Wasn't your fault." For a long time they sat there, 2 souls bound by loss, warmed by the same fragile fire. Near midnight the horses stirred outside. Ethan rose, hand instinctively going to his rifle. Through the frost on the window he saw movement, a tall, dark silhouette standing beyond the fence. He stepped outside, quietly, boots crunching in the snow. The air was still. The moon hung low silver on the peaks, and there at the edge of the tree line stood Kato. The creature was motionless, haloed in moonlight, its breath rising in soft clouds. In its hand it held the amulet's twin, glowing faintly like an ember. Ethan's throat tightened. "Why are you here?" he whispered. No answer, of course, only that steady gaze. Then Cato turned, pointing toward the north ridge. The gesture was slow, deliberate. A warning. Ethan followed its line of sight and saw faint flickers of firelight in the distance. Torches. The sheriff's men. When he turned back, the creature was gone. He woke Lila at once. "They're up the ridge. The sheriff found the cave." She sat up, eyes wide. "We have to stop them." Ethan nodded, grabbing his coat and rifle. "This isn't about proving anything anymore," he said. "It's about protecting it." They rode into the darkness together, the hooves of their horses muffled by the snow. The wind carried the smell of smoke down the mountain, and underneath it, faint but real, a deep, mournful sound like a drum beating beneath the earth. The mountain was stirring again, and this time it would not stay silent. Part 4. The Last Hunt. The mountain was alive with firelight. Tiny sparks flickered against the snow as Sheriff Reed's men climbed the ridge, their torches throwing red over white, turning the night into a fever dream of smoke and steam. Ethan and Lila rode fast through the valley, the cold cutting at their faces, the horses' breath pluming behind them. They could already see the glow ahead, a line of men gathered around the cave mouth like shadows worshipping a flame. Lila's voice trembled. "He's there, isn't he?" Ethan nodded grimly. "He warned me last night. Then we have to reach them before they do." By the time they reached the ridge, the wind had died, too still, too expectant. The kind of silence that comes before a gunshot. The sheriff stood at the center rifle slung over his shoulder, his hat low, his face carved with determination. Around him, half a dozen men, farmers, trappers, boys barely old enough to shave, all clutching rifles, eyes darting toward the black mouth of the cave. Reed raised a hand. "Hold the line. If that thing shows its face, we take it down." Ethan dismounted, shouting, "Sheriff, don't do this." Reed turned, surprised. "What the hell are you doing up here, Cole? You're about to make a mistake. Only mistake I made was letting you walk off my land alive last time you played hero." He gestured to the cave. "You've seen it, haven't you? That monster's been stalking this valley for years, killed game, scared half the trappers off. I'm putting an end to it." "It's not what you think," Ethan said. "It saved us," the men murmured. The sheriff frowned. "Saved you?" Lila stepped forward. "It's intelligent, Sheriff. Maybe even ancient. You kill it, you destroy something the world can never replace." Reed sneered. "Lady, you've been out here too long. You think a fairy tale's worth a man's life." She didn't flinch. "Maybe it's worth more than that." A sound rolled from deep inside the cave, low, mournful like thunder trapped in stone. The torches flickered, the horses stamped nervously. One of the men swallowed hard. "Sheriff, maybe we oughta—" Quiet, Reed barked. He raised his rifle. "Come out, you devil." The echo bounced through the canyon. Then silence, and from the dark mouth of the cave, movement. A massive figure emerged, slow and deliberate. 8 feet tall shoulders like boulders, fur matted with snow and soot. In one hand it held the amulet's twin, the sun symbol glowing faintly like a dying star. Cato stood at the threshold, eyes reflecting the firelight of a dozen torches. Not anger, not fear, just weary understanding. The sheriff's hands trembled, but pride steadied them. "Fire," Ethan lunged. "No." The gunshot cracked the silence. The bullet struck Cato in the shoulder. The creature staggered, bellowing not in rage, but pain that seemed to shake the mountain itself. Birds exploded from the trees, their cries echoing like shattered glass. Lila screamed, "Stop! You're killing him!" Reed reloaded. "If it bleeds, it dies." Before he could fire again, Ethan tackled him. They hit the snow hard, the rifle skidding away. The 2 men rolled fists and curses flying. "You blind fool," Ethan shouted. "He's not the monster here, you are." Reed spat, blood eyes burning. "You've lost your mind." He shoved Ethan off, reaching for his gun. That's when the ground shook. A deep rumble rose beneath their boots. The cave walls trembled, snow sliding off the cliffs like white rivers. Men shouted, stumbling backward as stones cracked overhead. Cato roared, not in fury but in warning. He pressed a hand to his wound, then turned toward the mountainside as if calling to something unseen. Ethan looked up and his heart stopped. The ice shelf above the cave was breaking. "Everyone down," he yelled. But the sheriff froze, eyes wide. A chunk of ice the size of a wagon wheel fell, striking the ledge beside him. He stumbled, and the ground gave way. In a blur of motion, Cato leapt forward, his massive arms sweeping Reed out of the path of the collapse. The creature took the hit instead, tons of snow and rock cascading down, burying the mouth of the cave in an explosion of white. The world vanished in noise. When the sound finally faded, all that was left was the hiss of wind and the ragged breathing of men. Ethan dug furiously through the snow hands, bleeding Lila beside him, tears freezing on her cheeks. They pulled away rock after rock, until at last they uncovered a patch of fur, still warm beneath the frost. Cato lay there, half-buried chest, rising faintly. His eyes flickered open. Amber dim but alive. Ethan dropped to his knees. "Hold on, friend. Hold on." Lila clutched his arm. "Ethan, look." Cato's hand moved slow, deliberate. He placed the glowing amulet into Ethan's palm, then pressed Ethan's hand against the snow between them. The heat from the stone melted a small circle of white, revealing another handprint, smaller, older human. The 2 prints overlapped perfectly, man and legend, side by side. Ethan's throat closed. The creature exhaled one final deep breath, a sound that felt like both a sigh and a prayer, and then it was still. The sheriff stumbled forward, his face pale, his voice trembling. What did it just do?" Lila looked up at him through tears. It saved your life." Reed's gaze shifted from her to the fallen creature. The firelight danced across his weathered face, turning him from lawman to lost boy. He removed his hat, slowly, eyes lowering in shame. "No one'll believe this," he muttered. Ethan's voice was steady. "Then don't tell them. Let the mountain keep its secret." The sheriff nodded once, broken humbled, and walked away into the snow. One by one, the other men followed, their torches dimming until only the stars remained. Ethan and Lila stayed until dawn. The first light spilled over the ridge, painting the snow with soft gold. They built a cairn of stones over Cato's resting place, laying the twin amulet atop it. Ethan whispered, "Maybe kindness was the only language the mountain ever spoke." Lila wiped her eyes. "And we finally learned to listen." They stood together in silence, the wind brushing their faces like a farewell. High above them, the mountain gleamed, a cathedral of ice and sky, and somewhere deep within a heartbeat still echoed slow and eternal. The mountain remembered. That morning, as they rode down toward the valley, Ethan turned once more toward the ridge. The cairn was barely visible through the haze, but he swore he saw a shadow move beside it, tall, gentle, fading into the light. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Part 5. The Whisper. Beneath the mountain, spring came late to the valley. The snow melted slow like a wound, healing from the inside out. The river sang again, breaking through its shell of ice. And for the first time in months, the mountains breathed warmth. Ethan Cole stood by the fence of his ranch, watching the sunrise spill gold over the hills. The fields were still bare, but the thaw had begun, and that was enough. He could smell wet earth again. He could hear the meadowlarks returning stitching sound back into the silence. Beside the porch, a new cairn of stones stood half buried in grass. At its base, a small wooden cross leaned slightly, and in the center, shining faintly under the early light, lay the sun amulet. Ethan touched the stone gently. Its surface was smooth now, the glow long gone. But when he closed his hand around it, he swore he could still feel a pulse, slow and steady like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled softly. The shelves, once empty, were now lined with books and sketches, Lila's work. She had stayed through the spring, documenting every carving, every symbol, every trace of Cato's story. She was leaving today. When she stepped out onto the porch, the wind caught her hair, lifting it like a banner of gold and brown. She wore a travel coat, the same one she'd arrived in months ago, but her eyes were different now. Softer, quieter, like someone who'd seen something sacred and couldn't forget it. Ethan turned as she approached. "Got your notes packed?" She smiled. "All 6 journals. And a sketch I'll never publish." He raised an eyebrow. "Why's that?" She glanced toward the mountain. "Because some truths are meant to stay where they belong." They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the creak of the barn door in the wind. Lila finally spoke, voice low. "You ever think about what it was, Ethan? What he really was?" He looked toward the peaks, the sunlight crawling up the ridges. "I think he was what the mountain needed him to be. And what I needed too." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I think you're right." When her wagon was ready, Ethan helped her load the last of her gear. The horses pawed the dirt, eager for the trail. Before she climbed aboard, she turned to him. "Ethan, thank you for believing, for fighting when it mattered." He smiled, small and quiet. "You did the same." She hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket. When her hand emerged, she held something, a small drawing, folded and worn at the edges. She placed it in his hand. "It's the last sketch from the cave," she said softly. "Not the handprints, the one behind them. I found it after we left." Ethan unfolded the paper. There, drawn faintly in faded pigment, was the image of a man and a giant standing side by side. Between them burned a circle of light, the same sun symbol from the amulet. He stared at it for a long moment, then nodded. "You sure you don't want to keep this?" Lila smiled. "I don't need to. I lived it." She climbed onto the wagon. As the wheels creaked and rolled down the dirt road, Ethan lifted a hand in farewell. She waved back, once her silhouette shrinking between the cottonwoods until it vanished into the horizon. The days that followed passed like gentle breaths. Ethan rebuilt the fences, patched the barn roof, and let the sound of the world fill the spaces where silence had once lived. Sometimes at dusk he'd walk up the ridge behind the ranch, the same path that led toward the old cave. The snow there was mostly gone now, but the stones still bore the faint marks of the handprints. He'd stand there, hat in hand, and listen, not for words Kato had never spoken, but for the heartbeat. Beneath the wind, the low, rhythmic whisper of something ancient watching over the valley. And every time, just as the sun slipped behind the peaks, he'd hear it soft and deep, a rumble that wasn't thunder, a sound that felt like thank you. One evening, as twilight spilled across the prairie, a lone Mustang wandered up to the ranch. It was wild, scarred, its mane tangled with pine needles, but when Ethan approached, it didn't run. He spoke softly, reaching out a hand. The horse snorted, stamping once, then stepped closer. For a heartbeat, Ethan swore he saw something familiar in its dark eyes, the same calm intelligence, the same quiet sorrow. He placed a hand on its neck, and beneath his palm he felt a faint vibration, a slow, steady rhythm. The mountain's pulse. He smiled. "You came back, didn't you, old friend?" The horse exhaled warm breath, clouding the cool evening air. Ethan led it to the corral, and for the first time in years the sound of hooves filled the yard again, not in loneliness, but in life. That night he sat by the fire, Lila's sketchbook open on his lap. Outside, the wind moved gently through the grass, whispering against the windows. He picked up his pen and began to write. The words came slow, steady, like footsteps in fresh snow. They said the mountain was empty, but I've learned that even silence has a heartbeat. And sometimes what we call monsters are only mirrors, reflections of what we've lost and what we hope to find again. He paused, staring into the flames. Then, closing the book, he leaned back in his chair, the crackle of fire and the soft hum of the night wrapping around him like an old blanket. Outside, the moon rose high, turning the snowcaps silver. Somewhere beyond those peaks, a shadow moved, not with menace, but with grace. The valley listened. And if you stood there long enough beneath the hush of stars, you could hear it too, that deep, gentle whisper beneath the mountain. A promise, a memory, a heartbeat. Ethan Cole closed his eyes. For the first time in a lifetime, he slept without dreaming of loss, only of wind, and footsteps in the snow fading slowly into peace. In the harsh lands of the Wild West, even legends can bleed and kindness can echo longer than time itself. If this story found a quiet place in your heart tonight, leave a comment below and rate it from 0 to 10. And if you listen closely the next time the wind moves through the mountains, maybe you'll hear the same whisper too. We were never alone. The night was still. No wind, no storm, only the quiet hum of crickets in the valley and the faint crackle of fire inside the cabin. Ethan Cole sat by the window, his chair angled toward the open plains. The lantern beside him burned low, its flame dancing softly against the walls. In his hands, he held a single drawing, the one Lila had left behind. The image had begun to fade, the pencil strokes thinning where his thumb had traced them too many times. But the message remained: two figures, man and giant, standing side by side beneath the burning sun. He smiled faintly. Outside, the moonlight spread silver over the hills, and in that glow, the world felt smaller, warmer. The air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke. Somewhere far beyond the ridge, an owl called once, its cry drifting down like a memory. Ethan leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed, and began to speak not to anyone in particular, but to the stillness itself. "If you ever feel alone," he said softly, "remember. The mountain still remembers your name." He paused, listening to the words as if they weren't his own. The fire popped, a log collapsing inward, and the guitar that rested by the hearth caught the light, its strings humming faintly from the breeze through the cracks. He reached for it, his fingers slow but sure, and strummed a single chord, low, mellow, drifting like smoke. The sound filled the cabin, mingling with the wind and the heartbeat of the night. As the melody faded, his eyes drifted once more toward the mountains. They rose like sleeping giants, their peaks glowing silver beneath the moon. And for just a moment he saw it, a shadow moving along the ridge. Tall, slow, graceful. It didn't hide. It simply walked its steps matching the rhythm of the earth until the clouds swallowed it again. Ethan didn't move, didn't blink. He just smiled, his breath catching with a quiet laugh that sounded more like peace than disbelief. "Good night, friend," he whispered. The fire dimmed. The night grew softer. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches whispering to one another like storytellers trading secrets. Inside, Ethan placed the drawing back on the table beside the amulet, now cracked, its glow long gone, but its warmth eternal. He closed his eyes, his head resting against the chair, the faint rhythm of his breathing blending with the whisper of the wind. And in that silence, that perfect, infinite silence, you could almost hear it, a heartbeat, deep, steady kind, the same pulse that had guided the creature through the storm, the same rhythm that echoed in the bones of the mountain, the same truth that outlived every story. The camera drifts outward, past the window, past the fence, up the slope where snow still lingers in the shadows. The moon spills across the peaks, and in the distance a colossal silhouette moves once more. A figure, half man, half legend, walking slow through the mist, guarding, remembering, alive. Out here in the cold heart of the West, kindness is the only fire that never goes out, and sometimes the things we fear most are only waiting to remind us that we were never truly alone. Soft guitar picking minor chords fading to silence. The crackle of fire. Wind passing gently through the cabin door. The mountain glows under moonlight. The shadow dissolves into mist. Screen fades to black. In the frozen heart of the Wild West, only kindness keeps a man from truly being alone. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and rate it from 0 to 10. Subscribe and ride with us again, for the mountain has many more stories to tell.